It was 03 on June 6, 1944. A cold, damp dark hung over the channel. From his concrete observation post high above Omaha Beach, a German major kept watch on a single strip of horizon he had learned to measure in the grain of waves and the angle of moonlight. Months of the same view had made waiting a kind of slow pain, an ache sharpened by the thought that the sea could become a road for armies. He was responsible for coastal artillery, 150mm guns trained to sweep the approaches, and for the men who tended them. If that beach fell, paths inland would open. The stakes were simple and enormous. His name appears in post-war accounts as Major Verer Pluscat, name spelling in source indefinido. In his testimony he described routine and readiness, the crews checking sights, the habitual clink of tools, the low conversation of soldiers trying to keep their voices ordinary. Outside the night sounded thin. At 05:30 something changed. At first it was only a low mechanical growl, distant and indistinct. Then the sky filled with motion. Parachutes bloomed like white flowers against the dark. Aircraft streamed in numbers he had never seen at once. The major watched as shapes, tiny at first, then unmistakably men and equipment, descended to secure roads and bridges behind the coast. Alarm bells cut the air. The regimental commander's telephone calls came through in quick commands. Crews left their coffee, ran to their guns, and trained barrels inland where the first landings were reported. Men moved with the practiced speed of those who had rehearsed for hours and years. Adrenaline sharpened them, but there was no mistaking the sudden, alien scale of the assault. If this account grips you, take a moment to subscribe. There are more eyewitness perspectives like this one that reveal the human side of history. By 06:30 dawn made what had been heard visible. The sea to the east was no longer empty. From the major's vantage, the horizon filled with ship after ship, barges, transports, escort vessels, destroyers, rising and falling on the swell. Rows of steel stretched until his eyes faltered at the distance. Naval batteries opened first. Guns of enormous caliber spoke in thunder and flame. The concrete around him shuddered as shells struck the heights and sent dust and pebbles raining into the bunker. The smell of cordite and the fine grit of pulverized stone filled every lung. The coastal 155mm batteries returned fire. In his account, the major described a grim mechanical exchange, the precise business of ranging rounds, of bearings called and adjusted amid smoke. They scored hits and Allied transports took losses. But the fleet's weight was relentless. A single battery's fire could not stem rows upon rows of landing craft pushing over the horizon. Naval bombardment kept coming, each salvo reshaping the landscape of the beach and shredding the scrub that had offered the defenders some concealment. At about 07:30, the first wave came in. Landing craft surged toward the shoreline in a rehearsed, terrifying rhythm. Bow ramps lowering, men spilling into surf and sand. Barriers and hedgehogs, wooden and steel obstacles meant to rip open the hulls of craft, snagged some boats and sent others crumpling. Where obstacles failed, they slowed the attackers long enough for short-range defenses to open up. MG-42 machine guns stitched bursts across the surf in a staccato so rapid it sounded like tearing fabric. For a while, in isolated sectors, defenders stopped landings cold. Men behind emplacements cut down waves of attackers and forced craft to drift or retreat. The fighting was granular and savage in its immediate details. Small groups clung to shingle, riflemen pinned on rises, engineers fought to clear lanes through tangled obstacles so tanks could come ashore. Tanks did come, in some places, reinforced by armored bulldozers and flame-suppressing teams clearing beach obstacles. But the sheer number of the invaders and the support they enjoyed from the sea reduced the defenders' options. Each time a landing succeeded, it created a precarious pocket from which fresh troops flowed inland. The major's account emphasizes the physical toll on his battery. Ammunition belts grew thinner under the endless demand. Shells that had been stockpiled for months were spent in the space of hours. By 08:45, he reported, entire positions that had held stubbornly fell silent. Not because the men surrendered, but because the guns no longer had the means to speak. Where machine guns still fired, their barrels were hot and hands were trembling. Observers saw sights that had nothing to do with strategy. The cracked glass of a scope, the blackened fingers of a loader who had been working belts for hours, a map pinned to a bulkhead with coffee stains and a single new tear where shrapnel had lodged. Bodies littered the sand in a grim motley. Wounded and dead lay mixed, Allied soldiers, German defenders, until medics and stretcher teams waded through surf and shell-swept dunes to drag them back to provisional aid stations. In the hours after the first landings, Beach turned into foothold. Supply craft continued to land. Jeeps, ammunition, medical supplies, fuel. A steady procession of vehicles and men funneled inland, slow at first and then with increasing speed as paths were opened and engineers cleared obstacles. According to contemporary accounts cited in post-war histories, the German 352nd Infantry Division suffered heavy losses, over 1,200 killed, wounded, or captured in the first 12 hours, a number that appears in the sources the Major's testimony feeds into. Throughout these hours, the Major maintained a mixture of procedural focus and an almost private, mounting dread. He and his men did what they were trained to do. They ranged their guns, they adjusted, they fired, and they tried to seal breaches. Yet witness testimony from him, as recorded after the war, returns again and again to a single image, the moment at dawn when the sea revealed itself as an armada. In his account he said that sight struck him as decisive. He believed in that instant that Germany had lost the war. He did not claim that a single view determined history, only that for him, as a witness on that morning, the scale and coordination of the invasion made the outcome feel inevitable. His words came later, in interviews and in the pages of histories that collected survivor testimony. Cornelius Ryan's The Longest Day records this perspective among many others, using it to sketch the human impressions that classical military reports cannot capture. The importance of such testimony is not that it replaces strategy or logistics, but that it furnishes a human scale to monumental events, the way a lone observer can translate the abstract sweep of armies and fleets into a single, shattering moment of recognition. Even as pockets of resistance held into the afternoon, the momentum had shifted. Communications were frayed. Commanders tried to coordinate counterattacks while supply and reinforcements trickled in too slowly to match the scale of the landing. For the men on the ground, the day became a calculus of survival. Preserve ammunition, hold commanding terrain as long as possible, render aid where you can. For some units, the fight continued for days. For others, broken command and the pressing need to save lives forced withdrawals and futile counterthrusts. There is a particular sorrow in post-event recollection. The Major survived, and his post-war testimony is sober and concrete. Timestamps, places, the feel of dust in a respirator, the crack of wood and metal. He did not embellish with rhetorical flourish. Instead, he offered measured sensory statements that historians have used to reconstruct the texture of the morning. That texture matters because history is not only a ledger of divisions and losses. It is also the accumulation of moments when individuals perceived, interpreted, and reacted. The shocking quality of his account, then, is not sensationalism. It is the dissonance between a long-numbed vigilance and a sudden, undeniable scale of attack. The sky flowering with parachutes, the horizon choked with ships, the bunker trembling under naval gunfire. For him, the dawn revealed an order of magnitude he had not been able to anticipate from routine observation alone. In his testimony, he linked that visual magnitude to the larger arc of the war. He said he knew in that moment that the balance had shifted. Years after, historians have placed that single morning within the broader calculus of the Second World War. Logistics, air superiority, deception operations, and the bravery and mistakes of men on both sides. But primary testimony like the Major's remains indispensable. It converts the noise of numbers into a human pulse. What it felt like to watch defenses strained to breaking. What it sounded like when a bunker filled with dust from a near miss. What it meant to see a coastline transformed into a doorway for an invading force. This is why the account endures in works such as Cornelius Ryan's The Longest Day, because it offers a close, intimate vantage on the opening of one of history's largest amphibious operations. The Major's recollection does not claim to explain every strategic outcome, nor does it absolve the wider machinery of war from scrutiny. It simply records what a single witness saw and how that sight shaped his understanding of the day. If you found this eyewitness perspective compelling, there are more personal accounts that illuminate the human side of strategic events, stories of surprise, of courage, and of regret. Watch the linked video on another defining surprise attack to continue unpacking how individual moments reshape history. If this story mattered to you, like, share, and subscribe, so these first-hand memories stay accessible for those who want to understand the past, not only through facts, but through the eyes of those who lived it.